as I said at the beginning of worship, that today is known as Christ the King Sunday in the church year. So in a sense, it's really New Year's Eve, and we begin fresh with Advent next week. Now, we're told that Jesus is King or Lord over all in our scriptures today. In a sense, also, this is like reading the last 2 pages of a novel before you start the first page, because we're giving a picture of Jesus at the completion of his ministry on earth, even as we have in mind entering into Advent, that image of Jesus being born as a vulnerable baby in strange circumstances. But really, Christ the King, what do we here in North America know of kings? Now, when I thought about what is my imagery of kings, all I could really think of were some of those fairy tales and stories that are told about royalty. The Princess and the Pea, The Emperor's New Clothes, Cinderella, I'm sure you could add to the list. But then the other kings that we know of, Elvis, the king of rock and roll, and then there's Burger King. Anyway, our experience with kings is pretty slim. So even though we don't really have any actual kings in our midst, I'd venture to say that we do have some idea of what they have to do or what they're supposed to do, other than be born with blue blood. I'd also guess that our idea of royalty is not what Matthew was describing as a life fit for a king. Think about that list that Jesus told the sheep: feeding the hungry, slaking the thirst of those with nothing to drink, welcoming those without a voice or a place in the world, and add to that, tending the sick and visiting the imprisoned, which we could read as the undesirables. Jesus' people do these things. So we have to go back a little bit to the Hebrew concept of kingship. Biblical kingship had to do with justice and with righteousness and a compassionate God. In essence, what this image is a shepherd king. The Reverend Dr. Delmer Chilton wrote that this image, at least in its purest and prophetic form, has little to do with the pomp or circumstance and chivalry that we associate maybe with the great houses of Europe, or the images that, as I thought of, fairy tales, or the celebrity that we see in People magazine of the Windsors. So I ask, would we ever picture a shepherd as a king if we didn't know about Jesus? Probably not, as I don't think we have a lot of shepherds in our midst either. It's not part of our everyday experience, although it's part of my everyday experience living on a sheep farm. But a shepherd's job is to protect the sheep from harm, to provide for their growth and their happiness. A shepherd has to think of his or her own needs last and the needs of the herd first. And that is the image that Israel chose for their king. So how then could our lives in a land without kings or royalty be informed by our lessons today? Well, as the story of the surprised sheep and goats echoes in our ears, think about what Paul reminds his local church and us about. That Jesus is above every ruler, authority, power, lordship, every name that is named in Paul's day and in the time to come. This is the message to the Ephesian Christians in the time of the first century. And what they heard was that no matter how comprehensive Caesar's power might seem, Jesus was above him. And in our own time, we too need to hear the comfort or the challenge, depending on who you are, that no human authority will win the day. Jesus reigns over them no matter how exciting or dismal our current situation may seem. This is a countercultural power. It's also the good news of Christ the King Sunday. So this good news, it combines kind of an ordinary message along with the mystical essence of our faith. And the ordinary message from the sheep and the goats is that Jesus is the one with the ultimate power. And so we don't have to focus on being rewarded or punished, which is a dead-end street anyway. Instead, Jesus' point in his story is that we are to focus on what we can do for the other, however that other appears in our life. It is that simple. But then the mystical aspect of our faith, where our faith comes in, has to do with you and I as Christ's body, as the church. We are here and we are now. And you and I are the living, breathing Christ in the midst of the world. So as the church, we're the ones living out the role of the shepherd. We're the ones that are here to tend God's garden, and we are the ones who are to care for God's children. And in each one, we also find the face of Jesus. So the simple message is, when we care for others, we care for ourselves. And in doing so, we entertain angels in our midst.